Good evening. Welcome to the very first Downers Grove Village Council meeting of 2022. In keeping with best practice guidance from state and local health departments, we continue to ask those who are in village buildings, including this one, to wear masks. Also, with the recent surge in cases of COVID, we have, as you can see, added the glass up here, and we ask that folks try and maintain space and appropriate social distancing when in council chambers. As is our custom, we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Rosa, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Barnett.
Here.
Commissioner Jose. Commissioner Wallace.
Here.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit.
Here.
Commissioner Colavani.
Here.
Commissioner Gilmartin.
Here.
Commissioner Glover.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Jose is attending to some business obligations downtown today. Item 3 on our agenda tonight is a proclamation. I started this proclamation a little while ago and think it's important to remember. This is a proclamation concerning King Day, which will be next Monday. Whereas Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. devoted his life to advancing equality, social justice, and opportunity for all, while challenging all Americans to participate in reconciliation and the never-ending work of building a more perfect union. And whereas Dr. King emphasized that his dream excludes no one from its promise and protection, and affirms that every individual's rights are God-given, neither conferred nor derived from the state. Whereas Dr. King recognized that everyone can be great because everyone can serve, requiring only grace and love to do so, during his lifetime encouraging all Americans to serve their neighbors and their communities, remembering the urgency of now. And whereas Dr. King warned us not to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred, that dignity, discipline, and nonviolence were the way forward, that we cannot walk alone in this walk to justice, and we cannot turn back. Whereas in 1994, Congress initiated the King Day of Service, a nationwide effort to transform the holiday honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. into a day of community service, focused on Dr. King's example of working to solve social problems while focusing on bringing people together and breaking down the barriers that have divided us as a nation. Whereas serving on the King holiday is an appropriate way to honor Dr. King, meet local and national needs, bring our citizens together, and strengthen our communities and our nation. Whereas the King Day of Service is the only federal holiday commemorated as a national day of service and offers an opportunity for Americans to give back to their communities on the holiday, as well as a time to make ongoing commitments to service throughout the year. Whereas the King Day of Service projects are organized by a wide range of nonprofit community organizations, educational institutions, public agencies, private businesses, and other organizations across the nation. Therefore, I, Robert T. Barnett, Mayor of the Village of Downers Grove, in honor and recognition of the contributions of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to the advancement of equality in our country, proclaim January 17, 2022 as Martin Luther King Jr. Day in the Village of Downers Grove, and urge our citizens to honor the memory of Dr. King, follow his example, and put his teachings into action by participating in the King Day of Service, and to find ways to give back to their communities by searching serveillinois.gov, givingdupage.org, or AmeriCorps.gov and searching MLK Day of Service. Dated this 11th day of January 2022, Downers Grove, Illinois. Is there a motion concerning minutes of previous council meetings?
Mayor, I move that the council adopt the village council meeting minutes from December 21st, 2021, the executive session meeting minutes from December 14th, 2021, and the executive session meeting minutes from December 7th, 2021 as presented.
Second.
Any council comments or questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries unanimously. This takes us to item 5 on our agenda for the evening. This is the public comment portion of our agenda. For those that have been watching over the last month or so, I have a few additional comments to tip off this portion of our meeting. A few guidelines for the public comment section. Some you've likely heard often, and others an important reminder. The public comments portion of these meetings, both on agenda items and on non-agenda items, is an opportunity for the public to address the council. And while we try to be accommodating, it is not a question and answer session. We have a lot of opportunities to ask questions or engage council members, from e-remarks to email to the CRC to coffee with the council when it's not COVID raging. Or you can always go old school and call any one of us. We get voice messages all the time, and we usually return those calls pretty promptly. But the public comments agenda item is an intentional part of a structured meeting. So please, state your name for the record. Keep your comments to 5 minutes or less. Avoid repeating what others have already said. Keep your comments to one visit to the podium per subject. And please remember, it's an opportunity to be heard. It's not a debate or an open discussion. So with that, are there anyone who wants to approach the podium, address the council on subjects not on tonight's agenda?
Good evening. My name is Marshall Schmidt. I reside at 4923 Seeley Avenue. I'm here to object to a gross deprivation of due process rights last night in this building. Last night, the Planning Commission held a public hearing regarding a petition to amend the nonconformities section of the zoning ordinance. At the beginning of the public hearing, the chair swore in all those who were going to speak. The staff presented the petition, which justified the request to change the nonconformity section based upon the comprehensive plan and the fact that it was a conforming or amendment to clarify the zoning ordinance. In the presentation, however, the staff cited no examples of the practice and the interpretation that they now are attributing to the nonconformity section of the ordinance. Many members of the public then got up and explained how the amendment was in fact designed to enable McNaughton builders to build 12 homes on the Longfellow property, which is being sold or may have already been sold by School District 58. They explained how neither of the criteria were met, and they pointed out that no evidence had been presented that it was a clarifying amendment. No examples, no other explanation. When the staff got up to respond, they offered no examples or no explanation. The chair then closed the public hearing. 4 members of the panel then questioned the request and offered the possibility of offering more community dialogue and taking more information so that they could reach a reasoned decision. Seeing that the amendment was in trouble, however, the chair asked the staff for examples that supported the petition. The staff offered 3, the first, which the public had never seen, one which on its face was at best irrelevant, didn't support their position, and the other 2 had never been disclosed to the public. When the public objected and asked to respond, the chair refused to reopen the public hearing, refused to provide the citizens due process to respond. The village representative, the village lawyer today, this afternoon, produced the 3 slides that were shown. And they're being investigated, but even that preliminary investigation shows that they're likely not relevant to the amendment. And even if they were the case, all they show is that twice over 10 years, the village staff ignored the plain language of the zoning ordinance. That does not provide a basis to amend the zoning ordinance. The chair at the meeting then asked the staff how they wanted the motion to read. A vote was taken, and the vote was 4-3 to recommend amending the ordinance. The chair's actions last night disenfranchised citizens of this village by preventing the public from responding to information that was withheld from concerned citizens, and I personally had asked the village lawyer and the village manager to provide those examples months ago in response to their interpretation of the amendment, but they were never provided. The chair prevented citizens from responding, and then the panel explicitly relied on that additional information to recommend the amendment. The attempt to ram this amendment through the Planning Commission and this village council is deeply offensive. At the last council meeting, the mayor took great pains to note that the council is not the one selling Longfellow. But the village administration is attempting to revise the zoning ordinance to enable McNaughton to build 12 homes on narrow lots, which cannot be done based on the current wording of the ordinance. In response to a social media post asking people to attend the commission meeting to object to the administration's transparent attempt to eviscerate the lot width requirement, someone named Bob called the concerned citizen despicable and accused him of pushing misinformation. What happened last night and today when a council member parroted the clarification rationalization and referred to these two examples and denied that there will ever be a public hearing on the Longfellow development shows that the only despicable attempts to push misinformation and avoid thoughtful analysis are those of the administration in control of this village. In reality, what's going on here is in the bidding process, the staff made a mistake. They'd forgotten or they didn't refer to the nonconformity section, and they told the builder otherwise. And now the staff in the village appears to be scrambling to avoid a lawsuit from the developer who's going to sue because he was given misinformation. But hopefully,
Marshall, wrap it up.
I will.
Shooting for 5.
Hopefully next month, when the amendment first comes before the council for consideration, independent members who care about the village will demonstrate character and protect the integrity of the village and its neighborhoods by rejecting the blatant attempt to destroy not only the Longfellow neighborhood, but all neighborhoods in Downers Grove that the comprehensive plan recognized needed to be preserved. Indeed, the comprehensive land use plan that hangs on the wall right over there explicitly states that the plan anticipates that properties, including the Longfellow property, will remain as they currently exist. Any zoning amendment that changes that is clearly contrary to the comprehensive plan. The reality is that if the administration gets its way, this zoning amendment will put every unique neighborhood in this community at risk. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Subjects not on tonight's agenda?
Marshall spoke a lot more eloquently than I will probably sound. David Rose. This past week, we witnessed at the national level a recollection and discussion of the events of January 6th from 1 year ago. When viewed in historical context, one appreciates why so many observers interpret the storming of the nation's Capitol building last year as an ominous forewarning of trouble ahead. For that storming reflects a failure on the part of the nation's citizens to reconcile the competing world views in our culture and to reconcile with each other and our history. I pointed out to this body that the competing worldviews, the zero-sum and non-zero-sum worldviews, are logically incompatible. They were able to compromise in the post-Civil War period, first by turning a blind eye to legalize racism, and then in the post-World War II period because they shared reliance on economic growth powered by energy slaves, and the nation's imperialism allowed them for a time to paper over their differences. But falling real growth, thanks to the dwindling supply of energy slaves and the diminution of the nation's imperial power, have now made compromise on domestic matters nearly impossible. Stated simply, when our nation's way of living is not environmentally sustainable, our love for and commitment to democracy can be seen quite susceptible to becoming autocracy or worse. I've called all this to Council's attention over the past several years to no avail. Council has failed to take its goal seriously and to engage in much-needed re-examination of its ongoing effort to make the village's way of life even less environmentally sustainable than it is already. So I was amazed to discover our esteemed mayor hit in his December holiday remarks encouraging everyone to engage if we are to overcome the divisions in our society. This chutzpah, this hypocrisy, came within minutes of comments I made earlier in the meeting about Council's years-long failure on environmental sustainability. its parroting of the line and failure to engage on COVID jabbing, its failure to publicize and archive various forms of public input to Village Council, and my endorsement of Marshall Smith's comments at the meeting about Council's failure to engage on Longfellow. As Marshall discussed last night, Planning Commission meeting featured what to me was a textbook example of chutzpah in government by none other than Village's Stan Popovich. Chutzpah is typically explained by the joke about the child who kills his parents and then pleads for the court's mercy because he's an orphan. In like fashion, Mr. Popovich argued that his office's past failure to enforce certain village ordinances should be seen by the commission as grounds for approving language changes that codify the failure as a clarification of the way the code was really meant to work. In spite of, as we heard again this evening, Mr. Schmidt's excellent rebuttal to the commission of the many ways in which the change was not a clarification and was furthermore a subversion of both general and specific elements of the village's comprehensive plan, the commission in its own version of chutzpah voted 4-3 to recommend approving. The result, as Marshall explained, was in no small part because of the pressure Mr. Popovich put on the vote, as if none of this had anything whatsoever to do with Longfellow. I couldn't help but I found it difficult to refrain from laughing at the kabuki theater aspect of it all. For I've come to appreciate that last evening's exercise is in fact typical of the way things often get done in Downers Grove. In this instance, a village council employed staff member approached the mayor-appointed plan commission for its approval to recommend back to the mayor-led village council a change in the village's code. It's a Rube Goldberg device intended to disguise autocracy in action. The code change was sparked by Plan 58 effort to show that Longfellow property is another instance of village councils doing a bait and switch. The vaunted Lakota plan that was the basis for the downtown TIF was a bait and switch, if one judges by the 1996 graphic depiction of the plan that looks nothing like what was actually built. And as Marshall just alluded to, Longfellow, as depicted on the wall over there, is supposed to be a park, not something made into a neighborhood-altering residential development. The council, of course, failed in all of this to retain it as public property, to attempt to work with other taxing bodies in the village, and instead did nothing. Why? Because certain members of council, notably the mayor and deputy mayor, believe you can never have too much private property to tax. Environmental sustainability be damned. Will council cap off the failure by failing to enforce its own code? One can't help but wonder if campaign contributions past or failure are a factor here. Council's trait of business friendliness potentially manifests yet again as an instance of obsequious prostration. So while much of the fear of autocracy is directed to the state and federal level, Council's handling of Longfellow up till now sadly suggests autocracy already insidiously infects local government. Beware of where we are headed if this is allowed to continue.
Thank you, David. Anyone else, subjects not on tonight's agenda?
Tom Schroeder, Forest Avenue. For once, I wanted to come up here and not be argumentative or anything, and I just wanted to publicly thank Judy Butney, who is from Forest Avenue, great friend, good neighbor, excellent citizen. Dave, how long has she worked for the village?
15 years.
15 years. She just retired officially as of last Friday, so I wanted to publicly thank her for that. She helped Dave and the gang put together big bundles of money and spent lots of money, but she saved a lot more money for us. One of the first things she did, I think, was come in and redo some of the bonds and sold some buses and did some stuff with leasing buses. I mean, she just on and on and on. She's just a great person, and I haven't met the new replacement, but I trust you guys hired somebody to backfill those shoes. So anyways, I wanted to publicly thank her. That's it.
Thanks, Tom. Anyone else, subjects not on tonight's agenda? Okay. Before we move on the Longfellow issue, far too much of the input we've gotten, we just heard a little bit more at the tail end here tonight, is ridiculous. Suggesting the village is somehow, we're going to go back to some emails, rolling over for developers, caving to big builders, only in for the taxing money, finding new and creative ways to prostate to business, are all absurd, as was the insinuation about campaign donations. The 7 folks, 6 tonight, sitting here, the 7 folks that were in attendance of last night's Plan Commission meeting, are all volunteer neighbors, guys. That's who we are. We have neighborhoods. We have developments that go in near us. We have changes that we have to endure as well. It's ridiculous to suggest that disagreement has to somehow relate or result in distrust. Suggesting that the process is somehow manipulated. What it is the same process that has been followed for decades in the Village of Downers Grove. The Plan Commission meeting hearing last night was round 1. There will probably be an upcoming Village Council meeting with a first reading and probably a second reading. That's the way the process has gone for every item this council takes up. Every one. There is nothing unique about this. But I want to read a statement the village put together before there was a buyer for this property, before there was a question about who was going to build houses on it or not build houses on it. The former Longfellow property consists of 12 lots in the Branniger Woods wooded home site subdivision platted in 1920, located in the R3 residential detached housing zoning district. Single-family houses are permitted in this zoning district. Therefore, the owner of the property may construct single-family houses on these lots, provided each house meets the requirement of the village. Why would we say that? Was it an error, as has been suggested? Was it a mistake? Why would we issue such a statement? It's not because it was an error, and it's not because it's a mistake. It's because that's what the current code says, and that's how it's been applied for decades. There are many examples over the years. One of the ones that was presented last night is nearly exactly the same situation. Another government body, in this case the Park District, sold to a developer, sold a park to a developer. The park at Sherman and Maple had been previously platted, just like Longfellow, as multiple lots, some with non-conforming widths less than 75 feet. The Park District removed the previous structure, chose not to consolidate the lots, and then sold the property to a residential home builder. Then the village issued a permit for a home to be built on one of those non-conforming lots. Not because there's something nefarious in play, not because the developer is in somebody's pocket, not because we don't understand the code, but simply because that's the way our code was written and has been interpreted since it was written. It's exactly what was intended. The current zoning ordinance regulations allow for one house to be constructed on each of the 12 lots where Longfellow now stands. The village is in the process of amending those regulations to be more clear. Maybe that was poor timing. Certainly it's been suggested that it was some kind of an angle. Maybe we should have waited till next year to make those clarifications. Can't turn back the clock. But frankly, it's not uncommon for the village to issue clarifications to code, and often those clarifications are spurred by specific situations that demand additional attention. And that, if nothing else, is what Longfellow has done. So let me be super clear for anybody watching at home or that decides to tune in later. The proposed language approved by the Plan Commission last night will not result in any changes in the application of the regulations, nor will it result in any expanded property rights for any property owner. Just as we indicated before the property was sold, the 12 Longfellow lots bring with them the same rights as any other R3 property in the Village of Downers Grove. Item 7 is our consent agenda. Is there a motion concerning the consent agenda?
Mayor, I move that the council adopt the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Item 8 is our active agenda. We do not have an active agenda tonight, so we will move to item 9, our first reading. This is the portion of the meeting where we typically either continue conversations or begin conversations on subjects with which we plan to take no action tonight. With that, I'll hand it over to Manager Fieldman.
Thank you, Mayor Barnett. There are 2 items on tonight's first reading agenda. The first is an ordinance amending certain traffic control provisions at Prairie and Forest Avenues. A consideration of this ordinance would, number 1, make the temporary 4-way stop sign at Forest and Prairie permanent. And, number 2, remove the existing no left turn from westbound Prairie to southbound Forest. As you all know, the Village Council is working on two objectives at this general location. The first objective is to reduce the frequency and severity of crashes at the intersection of Forest and Prairie. The second, recently directed by the Council, is to explore ways to reduce speeds on Forest Avenue from Prairie to Franklin. The Transportation and Parking Commission will be considering speed reduction efforts at their meeting tomorrow night. The Village Council will then consider TAP, Transportation and Parking Commission's recommendations on this topic at a future meeting, likely in February. The ordinance up for discussion tonight would create a permanent four-way stop sign and stop control at Forest and Prairie and would remove the existing no left turn restriction. The temporary four-way stop has been in place since October, and in December of this year, the Village Council directed staff to start the process to make the four-way stop permanent. With the four-way stop in place, the left turn restriction could be removed if directed by the Village Council, and as part of the discussion tonight, staff is looking for direction from the Council on that topic regarding the no left turn restriction. We're happy to answer any questions that the Council may have. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Dave. So to be clear, tonight's agenda item is only related to making the four-way stop permanent in Prairie and the question about the left turn. Not on tonight's agenda is any discussion of speed volumes or efforts to control speed volumes on Forest. Speeds are subject at the TAP meeting, which is coming up, and likely will end up, I suspect, here sometime probably in February. I want to start the conversation with the no left turn sign. Seems to me like not worth messing with right now, for lack of a better technical term. I don't think it's hurting anything, and I think we've seen what we hope to see at the intersection in terms of accidents and improved safety at the intersection from the stop signs. I'm inclined, if my council colleagues, some of them are nodding, some of them are not, but I'm inclined to just start by saying let's just leave the no left turn sign in place, put the stop signs in, and then wait to see what TAP comes up with on the balance of the street. But I thought maybe there was an opportunity to short circuit this a little bit.
Mayor, I just saw a bunch of heads nodding. If that is the case, then simply when we present this ordinance next week, we will remove that section of the ordinance which would allow the no left turn sign to remain in place. Is that suitable to the council?
Yep.
Yes.
I think it seems like people are feeling that way.
Yes.
So let's assume that, but then let's take comments from the audience on the subject of the four-way stop sign as we continue the conversation tonight. And remember, no action being taken tonight for sure. So anybody want to address the council on the four-way stop sign at Prairie and Forest?
Good evening. I'm Connie Larson from the 4800 block. And now that you've mentioned about the no left-hand turn, I think that's a good solution to leave that in place, because the four-way stop is great there, but not doing anything at the other end of the street where I live down by Franklin. Having that no left turn, if that was removed, that just really opens us up for a free-for-all for traffic regularly up and down our street on both ways. So if that's all we're discussing here, then I would thank you for taking that off of one of the strategies.
Be sure to follow the TAP meetings too.
Yeah, thank you.
Good evening again. Hope you guys all had a good Christmas and New Year, and we'll keep it positive here. And Bob, I'm glad you did take that off, because I had a whole speech and I was questioning why the heck you would remove that. It was not only for safety reasons for people heading west on Prairie, potentially turning south onto our street and having somebody, clip them from the other side. Now we've studied that more. We know most accidents happen when you're traveling north on Forest and you're sticking your nose out and somebody T-bones you from the other side. But as Connie pointed out, that it literally cuts out the cut-through traffic when people are coming south on Main Street and they come over the hill and they look down, they see all the backed up cars, and they turn down Prairie and then cut and take a left and go down our street. So by removing that, you would, in essence, add a ton more southbound traffic, which we've all been on record saying we have way too much traffic on that street to begin with. So I think that's a great thing that you're taking it off, but just so it never comes back up again, can we all agree that that's just going to stay there? Otherwise, we're going to have to sit there and beat this, and that kind of snuck up on there. I didn't realize that we were even talking about removing that no left turn sign. We were always talking about the temporary four-way stop and whether it was going to be permanent or not. And then all of a sudden, that kind of just slid in there. And to be honest, we all kind of felt that was a punch in the gut. Like we've been pounding the sand, pounding the ground so hard with all these different things that you guys are trying to teach us a lesson or something for trying to do this kind of stuff. And that's honestly how we felt. One question I do have, and I think we're all pretty much in agreeing that the four-way stop is doing what it's supposed to be doing. There haven't been any accidents, thank God, and hope there's not going to be. I'm just questioning what do you guys have in mind for the calming measures on the east and west side as you approach the stop sign? Right now there's those water container, those orange plastic deals. Do we know what the long-term solution is? Is that, I mean, I'm not saying it's right or wrong the way it is now. I'm just wondering long-term, is it going to be like those little cylinder, things that we put out there, or has there been any discussion on it?
We'll get some additional answers to that question when we bring more detail next week.
Just from a visibility standpoint, I don't know if that's the best thing. There might be something better, but I'm just questioning what, if the four-way stop is going to be there, a way to slow people down before they got there was to put that calming measure there. But is that the permanent thing, or is there something different?
Mayor, if I could, the plan is to install permanent versions of those orange barricades with center medians, and would be similar to the bump outs that are planned to be constructed at other recently amended intersections on Prairie from Belmont down to Forest. So Andy Sickich, our Public Works Director, is here tonight when he and his team are preparing the plans for the bump outs at the other intersections. We will take this direction as a request for permanent center medians that function much like the orange barricades.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else on this subject?
Yeah, Vito Siciliano, 4808 Forest Avenue. I just want to add to that no left turn. Today there was 2 cars that turned left off of Prairie going westbound. It happens continually. The majority of people that turn left, I know we're not going to get rid of it, but what I'm asking is, how do we stop it? We have signs, 2, that say no left turn. How do we stop cars from turning left onto our street from westbound Prairie traffic? That's my concern, is that majority of cars that turn left on our street fly down our street. And the reason why? They're trying to beat the traffic. They know Main Street's backed up, ready to turn down Franklin. They're trying to beat that. And they race down our street and do an Arizona stop at Franklin and continue on south on Forest. It's brutal. I just want you guys to know this, because we live there, we see it, we hear it. That's all. Just giving you a heads up on that.
Go to the TAP meeting, Vito. They're talking speed then. Anyone else on this subject? Council comments, questions? Rich?
Yeah, I'm totally for making permanent the four-way stop. I think that was one of our huge successes of last year. I think it gave us exactly what we were looking for. I'm not in favor of removing the no left turn sign. I think that's an unnecessary step backwards, so I agree with your comments, Mayor.
Chris?
Thank you, Mayor. I am also in favor of the four-way stop, but I do agree with the sentiment that's been shared from some residents about why we're making it permanent now before we're sort of deciding the remainder of that intersection. If there's really an urgency, if it's there temporarily, which I agree should remain permanently, if we should be waiting until we determine exactly what that intersection is going to look like and just do it all at once. I feel like we're still collecting speed counts on those streets as we go, and it feels like the stop signs are there. Why a separate ordinance now to make them permanent? I'm also interested to hear what TAP's feelings are on the recommendations that are going there. But I also still remain concerned about the traffic volumes on this particular stretch. And while we wait to get more counts, I feel like it's worth revisiting ways to help reducing traffic on this street. I think there are ways to do that. I think we've discussed some of them. The appetite for that doesn't seem as rich from the council as I would hope, and I understand some of the reasoning behind that. But I do think it's still a valuable exercise to be looking at here and not ignoring the volume as an issue either. I think we've done some good work with the stop sign. I agree that the orange barricades and what will be the permanent solution there will also help. There were some streets analyzed in comparison to the stretch of forest that demonstrated a similar volume count and speed count. I think we should take a closer look if those are truly true apples to apples comparisons. A lot of those, I think, I took some time to look at a number of them. They seem to have different factors that sort of lead to a little more, I think, speed, a little more traffic. But this stretch of forest still continues to concern me with the size of the lots, the closeness, the proximity of the houses to the road. And I think, yes, while we've identified a way to stop the accidents, it still uncovered this issue of volume. And I just want to continue to be on record saying that I think there's still work that we should be looking at to do there. So I hope my fellow council members will join me in that exercise. I know that's a slippery slope to some, but this one does still feel like an anomaly to me. So with that said, I did have one question as well. And as it pertains to stopping the left turn, is there a way to extend the barricade that heads west on Prairie to put a physical barrier from someone not being able to turn left, yet still, I assume, you can still go south across Prairie from the other side of Forest? Is there a way to sort of prevent that or build that into the an idea to help, as was brought up by one of our residents here, by Vito, in terms of how do we stop that left turn from happening? Because there are still counts of cars turning left, we know that. And I just didn't know if in that design, if there are things that we can do to help prevent that.
I think there's an opportunity to look at that issue when we design those center medians.
Yeah.
So again, Andy's hearing this right now, so we'll take that as direction when we start designing this project for next year, or later this year construction. It's 22 now. We can present that when we bring forward the contract. So don't know for sure, but we'll certainly look into what opportunities we have there.
And then just finally, other than, as the direction came from council last time, which we were all, I think, in favor of making the stop signs permanent, is there any other advantage to doing that now rather than waiting for what the full solution that we can think of?
Just as directed by council.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you.
Leslie?
I'm not going to repeat a lot of the comments. I'm kind of leaning more towards Commissioner Gilmartin. I was also hoping we get a little bit more time with a couple of our other efforts, and I'm happy to see that there have been no accidents from the four-way stop, but I also agree that I think we still have a volume and speed issue for this one small block, knowing that, again, I live close to Cumner, and that was, I believe, one of the ones that we used as an example. And I can see how it's very easy to fly down there because there are, the stop signs are pretty far between. But it's also not being used as a cut through for a main route, which is what this block of forest is specifically being used for. So I agree with Commissioner Gilmartin that it does feel a little bit different. Again, I am glad to see that the stop signs are doing their job, but I agree that we need to look at this in a little bit bigger picture and make sure that we're dealing with some of that speed and volume, which I know is coming from TAP. And I'm happy and excited to see what that may bring. I obviously also am in agreement that we should not remove the left turn and see if there are ways that we can make that a little bit more visible. I feel like the question of how do we stop it is the question of how do we stop a lot of the issues that we see village-wide, from no left turns to rolling through stop signs to, speeding down side streets. I just want to caution that we're never going to be able to completely stop any of those behaviors, unfortunately. The goal is to try to minimize them. So I just want to caution that we're going to work towards minimizing how often that happens, but I don't think any of us up here can promise that we would be able to stop that behavior completely. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Rich?
Yeah, I didn't think we were going to talk about volume tonight, but I do want to go on record of agreeing with Commissioner Gilmartin's position, and also reiterating that I'm still heavily in favor of taking a look at ways how we can help that blackout in the volume standpoint. You know, we don't have ordinances in place that say you can't cut through. We don't have ordinances in place that have specific volumes, but there's some things we do up here that are just the right things to do. You know, we had to look at a tough sidewalk situation on Norfolk a few months ago, and there was no ordinance that said we specifically had to do that. We looked at the options. They were tough options, and so there are things that we can do that are just the right things to do to help that neighborhood. I was really interested in seeing what TAP comes up with creatively, but I'm still on record of supporting reducing that volume, and then anything we can do to enforce the no left turn would be useful.
Anyone else? Hang on. I want to weigh in a little bit here. The issue that we have is I think twofold. One is I think I'm going to speak beyond the stop sign a little bit to the speed, and we've drifted into volume a little bit here tonight. But if we roll back the clock here, one of the things that I would suggest we hopefully have maybe added into our intentional directions going forward is that we do things a little incrementally. One of the things that we found with this stop sign is that we have had changes. I mean, is it enough for anybody? It depends probably on your perspective, but certainly there have been some. Mm-hmm. So one of the issues is, do we wait and do a package of stuff, or do we do one thing at a time? I would suggest we do one thing at a time. I don't see a situation, given where we got into, that's going to close this intersection. And I don't see a situation where an unclosed intersection with these kinds of volumes in this area should be unregulated on all four sides. So I don't see any harm in going ahead. The ideas that may come from the plank or from the TAP regarding speed are, you know, probably as long as our arm, right? Andy's going to help them wade through that, but there will be some, and I don't know what they are, but they, you know, you can Google for yourself. You can see what we've done elsewhere in town, whether it's Claremont or Carpenter and Grove or other places. So there will likely be something that is recommended from TAP in an effort to manage speed better. It's probably going to affect volumes. And I think, you know, Rich, you made the comparison to the sidewalk thing. One of the things that we were pretty intentional about with the sidewalk thing was to have that discussion under the context of, do we think we could apply this elsewhere? Because we know that's not the only one. Norfolk, a couple blocks by Kingsley, has got an issue. We know we've got that same issue elsewhere in town. Whether these are exactly the same conditions like the sidewalks are clearly not, because our streets are all unique. We've got our 3 lots and our 4 lots at various places. But it is likely that we would come up with a solution that might have some applicability elsewhere. And I'd like us to just continue down the incremental path. We know we've got problems we're trying to solve. We're starting to solve, and we're starting to see results. Nobody up here is saying, no, don't do it. But let's take them one step at a time and see what each answer is. Because we really do have every reason to expect that when we get to what we think is a solution, we feel like we're, whatever done is, that we'll have requests for that same stuff elsewhere. We know we got the problem all over town. When Leslie makes that point about we can't promise we're going to stop no left turns any more than we get anybody to follow speed limit signs. There's some reality. So we have to try and create an environment that's likely and conducive, and that's what we're trying to do. Tom, we're going to talk about this again. Hold your comments then. Email us. We're trying.
Literally got 30 seconds then?
Yeah, but we're trying to make sure that we have a process.
30 seconds. We spent 30 seconds.
I understand that,
Very
but
positive information.
Tom, stop. But what we're trying to do is establish a process that's repeatable meeting to meeting, where we don't have a debate that goes on back and forth, or hey, I thought about something. We're going to talk about this at least one more time. We're available by phone and email, and you can certainly track any of us down anytime. Please do that next. Email whatever your thoughts are tonight and show up next week. Next item on the agenda, Dave.
Thank you, Mayor. Is consideration of an ordinance is a very long name, which I will not read into the record. But I do want to provide some background information. This ordinance, if approved, would start the process to create a tax increment financing district for the property we are now located on, the Civic Center property, as part of our facilities plan, the construction of a combined village hall and police station right here. This ordinance establishes a date for the required public hearing for consideration of the TIF district, establishes the date for the meeting of the Joint Review Board, and actually there will be several actions coming forward in the next several meetings that will result, if council approves, in the creation of a tax increment financing district. Happy to answer any questions that the council may have.
Any questions or comments from the audience on the establishment or the beginning of the process to establish a TIF district? New TIF district on this site. Council comments or questions on this subject? Anyone? All right, well, this is the beginning of the process, which is going to allow us to facilitate some of the funding of our facilities replacement project. That's probably the takeaway. The establishment of a TIF district in the state of Illinois is not quick. It involves a lot of public hearings and a lot of prescribed processes, and we're beginning that process now.
Mayor, that ends the first reading agenda.
Next on our list is a manager's report about facilities. I would like to, in case anybody else would like to leave, I'd like to give us about 5 minutes to collect our thoughts, make a pit stop, and come back and talk a little bit more about facilities. So we'll take a 5-minute break.
We doing that in here, Mayor?
Yes. All right, let's reconvene this meeting. Get rolling here. Mike, we'll hand it over to you under the manager's report to talk facilities.
Excellent. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. I am very happy to be here this evening to bring you an update and provide some additional information as staff works to advance the facility replacement and sustainability plan. Tonight's presentation and discussion will focus on two primary topics. Those include the preliminary exterior elevations of the new facility, as well as environmental attributes of the building and the site. Before I go into the presentation, I want to acknowledge and introduce representatives of the design and construction firms. As a reminder, council approved contracts in December for the village to work with these firms on the design and construction of the facility. So with us this evening, we have Nicole McElroy from Leopardo Companies, and Brian Mead and David Yandel from FGM Architects. Very happy with this team. We've been working really well together as this project has advanced. I'm thrilled to share that information with you this evening. My presentation, in addition to these two topics, will provide a little bit of background information up front. After we get through the presentation of the preliminary exterior elevations, I'll pause and allow opportunities for comments and questions from council members on that particular topic before we continue. So the issue that we've been discussing for quite some time is that the buildings that the village occupies, the 42-year-old police station and 90-plus-year-old village hall, are below average condition and have a significant number of challenges in terms of how we serve customers, how we perform basic functions, and just the overall maintenance of these facilities. In short, they're both in need of replacement. The plan that has been developed and approved by the Village Council calls for the construction of a new police station, village hall, building that would also accommodate District 58 administrative offices and allow for sale of a portion of the property to allow for an apartment development. And that development would help pay for portions of the construction cost. All of this construction activity will take place on the existing Civic Center site that we are currently on. Construction is scheduled to occur between 2022 and 2024 with multiple phases of construction occurring. The cost range will be between $48 and $54 million. And the village has the revenue sources in place to fund this project that includes cash on hand and a bond issuance for which council approved a parameters ordinance last month as well. This slide highlights the schedule showing major milestones for the upcoming through the third quarter of 2022. You can see highlighted here the item that we're discussing this evening. There are more as we go through the remainder of this quarter, including the TIF public hearing, the completion of schematic design, and public meetings, including a neighborhood meeting and the Plan Commission public hearing. I thought this slide would be helpful to reference the flight analogy. It's something the council is familiar with and that we typically discuss during our long-range planning process. But it's a valuable tool to think about where we are right now as we're going through the design process. So you can think about this portion of design work as being at about the 20 to 30,000 foot level of our flight analogy. And so the direction and the comments that we're seeking tonight should be considered, at about that altitude level. As we get closer to construction, toward the third quarter of this year, obviously we'll move in a progression that makes more and more detail level decisions as we, in construction, right on that runway level of the flight analogy. So again, tonight we are seeking general direction on the exterior building elevations that you'll be seeing in just a minute. I will remind council there were a list of desired attributes that were discussed when the facility replacement sustainability plan was presented and discussed in mid-November. So this list appeared on the whiteboard in the committee room, and it was reviewed and approved by the village council as the desired attributes that the village working with the architect, should pursue in preparing the exterior elevations. I won't read through every single one of them, but certainly the architect was very aware of these attributes, and they have been incorporated into the designs that you'll be seeing. So what you will see are two options. One option that shows a flat roof building, the other option showing sloped roof. You'll see 4 perspectives for each of those options from different vantage points around the building. As a reminder, this is the site plan. It was also discussed and approved in November. It has the arrows you can see around the building showing where those perspective and viewpoints will be shown as you see each of the elevations. So the first one will be this arrow in the southeast, right here, and then we'll make our way around the building. Ground level views from the southwest, from the northwest, and then a bird's eye view from the southwest. All right, so here is the first elevation showing the view from the southeast for the flat roof option building. You can see features the use of brick and limestone along the facade, windows in prominent locations to designate the points of entrance into the building. You see this would be the entrance to Village Hall portion of the facility. There'd be a separate lobby on the east side of the building for the entrance to the police station lobby. Meeting rooms and council chambers would be toward the southern end of the building here. Go to the next picture, now showing from the southwest. This would be a pedestrian corridor along the west side of the building. From the northwest, so this is looking just on the other side of the railroad tracks, back toward the building. We would establish a plaza area in the northwest corner, and it has a little bit of a roof overhang here on the northwest corner of the building. And then here's that bird's eye view from the southwest. Again, all 4 images for the flat roof option. All right, then moving on, now you're going to see essentially the same building configuration, but now with the sloped roofs. So the same perspective on each image. But you can see the roof shape and form changes quite dramatically, now showing a sloped roof as opposed to the flat roof option you were seeing previously. Here's the image from the southwest. I should point out all of these visuals are available online. If anybody would like to click on the link to these slides and take a look, they can do so at their convenience. From the northwest, and then the bird's eye view from the southwest, showing the sloped roof option of the building. It's at this point, again, I'll remind council, we're seeking general direction, either a preference for either of the 2 options or general commentary that you would like to offer on any of the aesthetic features of the building. The architects are certainly here to assist with any questions.
Taking notes?
Especially those of a more technical nature. And be happy to entertain any questions or comments you have at this time.
Thanks, Mike. Anybody want to jump in and start? Leslie?
Yep. I just have a couple comments and one question. So I think in general, my preference is the flat roof, both for aesthetics, but also because when you start to get down, it's hard for me to separate the elevation and the environmental aspects, because if we decide to go with a few more of those environmental aspects, the flat roof is going to give us more room for those solar arrays. So my preference would be the flat roof so that we have more flexibility there. I also just like the way it looks better. But my other question is there a major difference between maintenance when you're talking about a sloped roof versus a flat roof? Is that something that we should be taking into consideration, I guess, is my question.
Brian or David, do you want to come up to the microphone?
Hi, good evening. So I think either one, I think in the sloped roof, if you noticed, it wasn't a continuous sloped roof all the way.
Right.
So it's really a structured roof that would go back to the flat membrane. So most of that roof is going to be a similar roof structure. So in terms of maintenance or cost, it would be very similar. I think the only thing I would say, and obviously Nicole representing the cost and construction, the structured roof, because there's a little bit more structure involved in getting that extra capacity and volume, there might be a little bit more cost with that part of it. And you're probably mixing 2 systems too, because the structured part that you see elevated would either be shingles or standing seam metal roof, and then you would have a membrane roof for the other part, whereas the other system would be a little bit more simplified.
Okay, thank you. Yep. And flat roof for me.
Anyone else going to voice their preference? We should all be voicing our preferences. Rich?
Yeah, I've got some comments. First of all, on slide number 10, I like the Prairie style elements here, the sweeping horizontal lines. The large cantilever evokes McCormick Place to me, which is, a lot of people head downtown, and that's a major iconic building as part of Chicago. I definitely like the columns. I think they add wonderful three-dimensional features and articulation. On slide 12, I like the double horizontal limestone banding that's evocative of the Main Street train station, which is, you can see that from here. So I believe the architects did a good job in picking up on that. I do like the overhang. I think it provides a nice vertical break. We're across from a residential area, so I think we have to be mindful of the height. So definitely love the columns and this thing. Unfortunately, particularly on slide 16, it looks like a prison to me, so sorry to the architect who threw that in there, but that was honestly...
Prisons need architects too, Rich.
I know. There's an awful number. Or architects need prisons. So those are my feelings about that.
Thanks, Rich. Nicole?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm really glad someone on slide 10 said that, mentioned the entrance to the lobby, because as someone with no architectural background, I was going to describe those as the two chunks of the front, but instead I will say the entrance to the lobby and then what mirrors the entrance to the lobby rather than two chunks. I agree with everything my colleagues have said thus far. What I want to add is what really drew me to the flat roof, amongst other things, was it appears that there's more windows, which would allow more light than if you were to look at the sloped roof option. So I appreciate more of the windows to give it less, Commissioner Colavani, of a prison feel. Obviously more light, enhances moods and just brightens the entire building as a whole. So I appreciated that about the flat roof option. Thank you.
That part about the prison, that won't be in the minutes, will it?
Danny, you got any thoughts?
I agree with what's been said already. I like the flat roof option. I think it aligns with all the desired attributes that we had gone over previously. I think it is going to be more timeless, going to look like it's been around for a while still, but I think this is more, gives it a more updated feel, and it blends in with the rest of the downtown area as well. So, yeah, I'm in favor of the flat roof as well at this point.
Okay. Chris?
Yeah, I, at the risk of being repetitive, agree. I think the flat roof style by a long shot, or a long mile for me. I love the pillars. I can envision us thinking of each of those pillars as members of our historical community, and maybe even some dedication to those, so we can think about that as we look forward. But to me, it's the perfect mix of what I think is a classical look with some just modern flair, for lack of a better word. So to me, I think it's great. I had the similar question about the maintenance on the roof, or efficiency there, and it sounds like those are considered. So yeah, I'm in full agreement on the flat style roof.
Okay, I agree. Mike,
All right.
we'll move on.
Okay, certainly.
I think you have a question from the audience.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Come up to the mic, Jim. Come up to the mic so we can all hear you.
One of the things, I love this look, but I spend a lot of time downtown, and I know a couple of developers, and since I apologize for being late, but the really cool thing I see downtown, and this is a question I have, and I don't mean to be rude and interrupt, but is there any contingency of having a green roof for this section of the green? Because I spend a lot of time at the Hyatt, a couple of hotels, because I'm getting the advertising with them and stuff. And the Mercedes dealership in one of the locations has a section, like the one corner there, and they got the plants and stuff. And the beautiful flowers, the prairie plants and stuff. I could see, wow. It's because you have taller buildings than in your area. So I mean, just the aspect of the prairie plants. I think they call it green roof. And they said that, and then now they modernized it probably within the last 6 years. They actually they officially proved it, if you go with the green roof, that it actually saves the maintenance of the roof. The way they process it, it's a little bit more cost. But on the long run, it saves the maintenance, the environment. It would be like top of the cake.
Sure. Well, you've perfectly teed up the next topic of discussion, because we're about to move into the environmental attributes of the building, and you've identified one of them.
Thanks, Jim. Anyone? Yeah, please come on down to this podium.
It's hard to tell, but over the doorways, is there going to be like a portico over the
Go to the microphone, and partly the reason for that, guys, let me just make clear, is that the folks watching at home want to be able to hear both sides of the conversation, so.
It's hard to tell, but over the doorways, directly above the doorway, is there like a portico?
I believe so. You can kind of, here you can see it a little more clearly.
Because I know like in some of these buildings, newer buildings, it's like hard to see the doorway.
Yes.
And so it helps to have something over, plus if it's raining or whatever, you have someplace to stop real quick.
Yep.
So, okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
And the one thing that's really not being shown on these, given how sort of early these images are, would be the signage that would also help to clarify where customers of various services will need to go and make sure they get directed to the right spot.
Okay, thank you.
The signage will help define the chunks.
Yes. That's exactly what I was about to say.
Anyone else from the audience want to make a comment or ask a question concerning these elevations?
I apologize if this was already discussed, but the overhang on the flat roof, is that designed to accommodate deflecting the sun in summer and allowing the sun to shine into the south-facing? Yes?
Yes, I believe, I'm getting a head nod from the architect, so I believe it is not just an aesthetic, but also an environmentally sustainable feature as well.
Is it a solid roof or?
I believe there are some.
Yet to be determined. There might be a trellis at the outer tip to reduce some of the weight there. But we will fully study the solar, acid solar.
And so that answer for folks at home, the answer to that question was it's not fully designed, but there would be, first of all, consideration of that, and there may be some trellis aspect of those overhangs to try and work on minimizing weight, but still managing some of the solar impact on the building. Mike, over to you.
All right. Oh, yeah.
Oh, geez.
It's okay, Mayor. I have one more comment.
Ask me more
All right. All right. One more quick question.
I'm
Really?
sorry.
No, it's okay. It's fine. It's actually just more of a request that I wanted to, I think I would be remiss if I didn't say again. If we look at number 12, slide 12, since we have the architects in the room, this is the view from the train. And I think it's extremely important to me that, and I hope all of us here, that the view from the building has some substance from that view, since there's going to be thousands and thousands of people passing by Downers Grove. It will be our representative flagship building, and I think that's where the view is going to be most seen from. So whatever we can do, I understand that's sort of the back of the building, and there's some restrictions with parking and the police vehicles and all that. Just whatever we can do to look at that and think of that as almost like the front door to a lot of people who are passing through.
Yes. Thank you. You'll be happy to know we absolutely talked about that, and we know there's a lot of viewers of this building that will never step foot inside it, and how still important that is of your image. So
it represents us, yeah.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right, I'm trying to avoid getting ahead of myself again. Anyone else want to talk more about the elevations and the renderings? All right. Now I'll put it back to Mike.
All right, so we'll move on to the environmental attributes of the project. Again, I will provide a presentation of this information at a summary level. At the end, as we have any questions or comments, we'll get assistance from the team to make sure we cover areas of technical expertise. As we're discussing the environmental attributes of the building, it is important to understand that there are a significant number that are already included in the baseline project budget and scope. So just as a result of code requirements and other factors that are already sort of built into what's going to be built before there's discussion of any enhancements, I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. In a minute, I'll show you a pretty extensive list of those features. In addition, what you will also see are recommended packages for allocating $2.6 million of environmentally sustainable enhancements to the building design and construction. These were prepared in consultation with the architect and construction management firm as what we believe are most desirable in terms of attributes that would provide for $2.6 million further as it relates to environmental enhancements. So I wanted to start out by showing the summary of the preliminary project budget. This was prepared and presented when the FY22 budget was released at the end of October 2021. And I'll draw your attention not only to the environmentally sustainable enhancement line item, so there's that $2.6 million that you see right here, but right above it, the line items for building and site construction. Again, those figures represent, and many of the features that are constructed just within those line items will also hit on sustainable enhancements to the building. Here is that list, again, the environmental attributes in the baseline budget and scope. Some of them expressed quantitatively, many of them qualitatively. I'm not going to read through every single one of them. If people have questions or want to delve further, we can certainly do so. But again, these touch on areas of the building itself, of the site, and attempt to demonstrate a manner in which the new facility will be much more energy efficient, consume less water, just provide a significant number of benefits. And again, this is before any of the environmental enhancements, the $2.6 million, are even applied. The table you're seeing here represents a summary comparison of the existing buildings, the existing Village Hall building that we're in now, an existing police station, in terms of energy cost and consumption compared with the new combined facility. This information was prepared. We provided the energy usage bills and statements to the architects who worked with the engineering consultants to analyze and prepare this information that shows that the existing Village Hall building, again, is significantly more energy inefficient compared to what is recommended in the new combined facility, with energy costs being reduced by 32%, the energy use intensity being reduced by over 50%. This is also a meaningful comparison because the buildings are roughly the same size, the combined size of the police station and Village Hall compared to the square footage of the new facility. And that's a factor that's weighed in that calculation. And then carbon dioxide reduction as well, reduced by 37%. Again, this relates to the, should have pointed out, the mechanical systems that'll be incorporated into the new building compared to the systems and the energy required to operate those systems in these existing buildings. All right, now here are the comparison of the recommendations for the allocation of the $2.6 million of environmental enhancements. And the columns show what is recommended for the flat roof building option and what is recommended for the sloped roof building option. Since council members clearly expressed preference for the flat roof, I'll focus on that one and really draw your attention to the fact that the difference appears in just two of the lines. The permeable pavers, there's a lower cost in the flat roof option, where only, about 20% of the parking areas are covered with permeable pavers. And there's a higher cost for photovoltaic panels. And it was alluded to by Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit. The flat roof obviously has a greater capacity to accept more PV panels as compared to the slope roof option. In addition to that, these recommended enhancements include an enhancement to make the HVAC system function more efficiently, enhancements to the exterior building envelope of $900,000 to improve insulation and better temperature control. The green roof, there you are, Mr. Kelly, that would install a green roof on 10% of the roof areas.
Can we move that up to like 20%?
We'll talk about that in just a good anticipation. You must have been reading ahead. The permeable pavers, as I just mentioned, covering 20% of the parking areas on the flat roof option. The PV or solar panels that would offset about 5 to 10% of the electrical load on the flat roof option. Bioswales and rain gardens covering 50% of the landscaped areas. And then rain harvesting for irrigation system, where the rainwater coming off the roof of the building would be captured in a cistern and used to irrigate landscaping around the site. So again, all these items you can see here in focusing on that flat roof option, totaling $2.6 million. Now there are certainly the ability to go beyond the set of enhancements that was presented just a minute ago, and that's what's shown on the slide, this slide here, where there are further enhancements that could be made to the mechanical or HVAC systems that include a hybrid geothermal system. It has an additional cost, so this is a net increase to the figures that were shown previously, but an additional cost of $2.5 million. The entire parking area could be made covered with permeable pavers for an additional $975,000. Photovoltaic panels could be expanded in other areas, and this would essentially require the installation of carports and parking lots that would have the panels above those carports. $775,000 of additional cost. Achieving an 80% of the landscaped areas with bioswales and rain gardens would cost an additional $150,000, and some enhancements for rainwater harvesting that would include the installation of 2 cisterns, one for irrigation and one for gray water. I believe those costs, $400,000, would also include the necessary plumbing and requirements to support a gray water system, given the codes, plumbing codes. So just for the flat roof option, that list of additional enhancements could total $4.8 million more beyond the 2.6 that was presented previously. And as we're wrapping up, as the team has looked at and studied options for environmental sustainability, there are 3 areas that are determined to be not practical or feasible. One of those is the installation of a complete geothermal system. What really inhibits us here is the construction phasing of the project and the fact that we will be continuing to occupy this building and the police station while the new facility is constructed, and therefore we wouldn't have access to a full geothermal field if it were construction on the green site or open construction site where the project could be constructed in one phase. The use of wind energy was also determined not to be feasible. And upon study and investigation, the construction of a facility that would be a net zero energy building at the time of construction was also determined not to be practical or feasible. This is not to say that the building could not be constructed in such a way that over time and eventually it would achieve a net zero energy status. All right. I will, actually, why don't we pause right here, and I will ask if there are any questions or comments from members of the council. And again, our team may assist with answers to those questions.
Thanks, Mike. Anybody want to jump in on this subject? Leslie, go ahead. Start us off
jump
again.
in on this subject.
Start us off again.
I personally would be in favor of doing all of the additional environmental attributes. To me, this is a very large project, and this is going to be a building that we are going to be using for, let's hope, decades. And to me, there is no reason that we should not be considering everything that we have available to us, given the size of the project. Especially, I really want to point out both the permeable pavers, the bioswales, and the rainwater harvesting for gray water. knowing what we know about this area, the flooding issues, St. Joseph's Creek, to me, we would be doing a huge disservice to the community if we did not do everything that we can to recapture water and minimize our stormwater impact. So to me, those should be non-negotiable, knowing the issues that we have. I also would suggest that, for that cost, I think we should be trying to offset our electrical load with renewable energies for basically as much as we can. I can understand that the hybrid geothermal system is a really big dollar amount, whereas the other ones seem a little smaller. That's one that I'd be willing to have more conversations about, but to me, the permeable pavers, the solar, the bioswales, and the rainwater harvesting for irrigation systems, for me, are no-brainers that I think we should add on to this. One question I do have is around the hybrid geothermal system, kind of how, I don't know enough about a hybrid geothermal system, so kind of, I guess what I'm asking for is, what's the bang for your buck? That's obviously the biggest cost line item. Is that going to also provide, a relative greater reduction in fossil fuels, CO2 emissions, all that?
Thank you. Dave Yendell with FGM Architects. Excellent question. And the summary that Mike's provided here, again, you can only imagine the numerous options and trying to find a perfect balance here. Yeah. The biggest challenges with geothermal, as Mike indicated, is the size of the site and the phasing in order to get the wells in place. So what we were studying more detailed was a hybrid solution. A traditional hybrid solution is usually about 50-50 based on the area that we've got available, which is really kind of the middle north portion of the parking lot that's not going to be touched in between the orange and the yellow, which is about 25,000 square feet. I know I'm getting too deep in the weeds, but that ends up more like a 40-60, 40% geothermal, 60%. So that helps minimize, but not significantly, the 33% and kind of the CO2 reductions of 30+%. They might go to like a couple percentage points better, but the cost offset, the $2.5 million, is for the cost of the wells themselves, and then you're kind of running redundant systems. We're still going to need the same VAV system that we have as a baseline mechanical system, but then you've got the secondary system, kind of the heat pump, that helps support the heating and cooling loads, and they end up fighting for real estate inside the building, so the building grows a little bit bigger as well. So there's a square footage cost add to the building.
Got it.
So from a energy saving standpoint, those couple points above where we're at with the recommended system for the $2.5 to $1 million just didn't seem valuable, but we didn't want to take it off the table.
Sure. Kind of a follow-up question. I mean, there's probably no benefit going forward, right? Because we're still not going to have the space once we sell off that land anyway.
Correct.
So eventually, we would never be able to kind of shift more towards that, like a full geothermal anyway, given the space constraints that we have.
You come back and drill more holes in the parking lots, and you probably would never get to 100%.
Yeah.
You might tweak that more to an 80-20 at the high end. But I don't think we'd ever get to a complete geothermal system where that is your only source of heating and cooling. And so what the geothermal does is a heat pump, instead of having a boiler for heat for hot water and a chiller for chilled water, the heat pump does the heavy lifting for all of that.
Thank you.
And then just because you mentioned the other stormwater attributes, finding that balancing act, there's kind of two things that we're trying to balance. On the roof, to the point before, real estate is key, so we're trying to find the right balance of space for PVs and then space for green roof, which helps not only with stormwater runoff, roofing maintenance, and the green or the heat island effect, which the white roof or the reflective roof surface will do as well. But you can see the main roof is the largest area. We've got several other low roof areas where we think the green roof might be able to be a feature, because you run into other issues about these sustainable attributes fighting for rainwater.
Right.
You also want the rainwater to fill the cisterns for the system, and also want it to feed the rain gardens and bioswales.
Yeah.
So it's hard to find that balance of feeding it all. Rainwater is unpredictable.
Yep.
As much as when it comes, right? So what was recommended was kind of a nice balancing act. And even if you said, please pursue studying these details further, we're still going to probably come back to you with a balanced approach that best suits all of those systems, if that makes sense.
It does.
Okay, anyone else want to jump in? We'll just go down the line. Rich, want to go down this way and come back this way?
Yep.
Let's start there.
All right.
No.
Go ahead, Chris.
All right, I'll go. So the percentages of energy cost, so the first question was, can you tell me what is energy use intensity?
It's fairly straightforward math. It's the, the BTUs per square foot per year. So it's the BTUs used divided purely by the square footage of the building. It's a relatively newer, criteria that's being used. It's relevant because the two buildings that we're replacing, it was relevant in this discussion because the two buildings that we're replacing are very similar in their size, as Mike mentioned, as well as their function. If you were to say, hey, my building's got a 67 EIU, you're not going to really take that out on the streets because a spec office building that's 77,000 square feet that only operates from 8 to 6 each day might have a lower EIU just because they're not a 24/7 facility like police. But it was important for the comparison here as we looked at different systems. This is kind of the recommended system we had, but as we've studied other systems at this very early stage of design, it was one of the criteria that helped rate.
Yeah. Okay, it's new. That's probably why I don't know what it is. Just kidding. I thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Up until 2 months ago, I didn't know what it was either.
So my second question is just, given that it's a 42-plus-year-old building and a 90-year-old building, and we're talking about percentages of savings that are 32% and 37%, help me understand, this is a question not loaded, but help me understand why it isn't more. If we're replacing a 90-year-old building, what am I missing that these aren't closer to 50 and 60 and 70, given the technologies and the environmental sustainability that we can build now that we couldn't 40 and 90 years ago?
That's a good question. I think, for these systems, this is very high.
Okay.
Energy codes have been getting stricter and stricter over the last 15 years and keep pushing the levels. And for comparison, the baseline code system at its current level, the International Energy Conservation Code, IECC, the baseline code compared to your current buildings is 28% greater.
Okay.
So what we're trying to do is make that even better and better. So actually, you're right. Maybe your gut think, wow, I should be twice as efficient with all this insulation and efficient use of energy, but there is still a cost to electricity and there is still a cost to natural gas, and those factor into the, at least the cost savings, the energy cost savings.
One factor that might contribute, and we'd be happy to study this with the architects to understand, we did replace the boilers in this building 2 years ago because they were at catastrophic failure, and we had to replace them before we went into the winter months.
So there was some efficiency already realized.
I believe the energy
baseline
consumption information that we provided incorporated some of that efficiency gain from those newer boiler systems. But we can
used the last 2 years of
we gave them. We can verify that.
Okay. Yeah. So it's just helpful to know just what we're getting for all this. And to Commissioner Sadusky, if you just point are the additional environmental things, which I also like a lot of as well, where are the gains? And you talked about the balance, but if 32% energy cost and 37% CO2 costs are above baseline or above expected, I would just like to know, how much above and sort of so we can look and see what we're actually gaining. I know we have to use energy, but just to the point of trying to figure out how much are these additional environmental attributes, helping us save in these energy costs.
Sure. We'll make sure that staff has the full kind of support that backs up the summary above.
Thank you. And the tanning beds are out, right? Tanning beds are out. Okay. Thank you, Mayor.
Rich?
Yeah, a few comments. First of all, an editorial comment. I learned today that this building was actually built in 1915. and it was originally powder manufacturing, and they manufactured chicken coops that they shipped all over the country. And we're trying to figure out when that company, it sold out to another company called Bateman Lumber, who moved out to Westmont. We're trying to figure out when Schaefer Bearing bought it, because I know that's who we took it over for. But those are side issues. To me, the $2.5 million for the hybrid geothermal strikes me as being unreasonable based on the footprint considerations that we have. My question about permeable pavers, they seem to have worked out really well in the parking lot across from North. And from what I understand about our requirement to do on-site detention is related to increase in non-permeable areas, which I think we probably won't see that increase, correct?
That's correct. What we believe, yes.
Okay. So then it really gets a matter of, you know, if we're not going to have to invest money into on-site storage, with the permeable pavers help with our stormwater issue. I wish they weren't so expensive, but I think that might be something to take a look at. What strikes me about the PV panels, my original thought is more is better. I'd like to see some analysis on the break-even point these days, because with a lot of these environmental savings, it's like, okay, the savings we will flow back to our residents will take X number of years, and then I think that would help this council make a more informed decision based on that. Bioswales, I'm certainly in favor of those, and then once again, are we competing between stormwater that we have to retain and stormwater that we want the plants in the bioswales to pick up? I guess I'm in favor of the irrigation system. I'm less sure about what we're getting with the gray water and how much our water savings cost would be and what our water consumption would be. So I'm open to looking at investing a little bit more in the total budget. I'm not convinced yet that another $4.8 million is worth the investment.
Nicole?
Thank you, Mayor. I think, like many of my colleagues, the hybrid geothermal system caught my attention. I appreciated the information on that, that it seems to be, you know, that it's a redundant system, energy savings is a couple points, doesn't necessarily seem like it's going to be totally valuable. So given the cost, that feedback I think was really great. So that kind of, you know, my thought really hasn't changed on that, that I'm not quite sure that that would be the best, you know, use of money spent. However, everything else on the additional environmental attributes list, I agree with, I'm fine with, I think it would be beneficial. Like myself, or like Commissioner Gilmartin, I questioned initially the savings. You know, you look at this and same thing. Totally forgot that we approved that new system a couple years ago because we didn't know when we were going to get a new building, and some of these things just needed to be fixed then. So that makes sense. Do you see the percentage of savings potentially going up from what it's currently estimated at? Should we add some of those additional environmental attributes?
Yes, that's a great point. On the previous slide, we have a budget a very kind of preliminary working budget of $900,000 to increase the exterior envelope and the performance of it. Additional insulation at the roof, at the perimeter walls, other things that will help make the mechanical systems more efficient, as well as some of the other user occupancy attributes, you know, the glare control, sunshades, you know, the right type of glazing that reduces solar heat gain on those south elevations. So it gives us a little room to work as we explore further, you know, the overall building. I can only stress again how early we are in the design phase.
Sure.
You know, the goal here to get direction and study these attributes further, and certainly come back to you guys later with a little bit more detailed information is the primary goal.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about there's this comment about initial occupancy and that there might be a path forward that is improving from that point. Help us understand what that might look like. How does that work?
So preliminary conversations within the design team, that's our mechanical, our MEP consultants and others, see net zero, which is a target that the federal government has set for 2045, to make their portfolio of new buildings net zero, is very challenging for this project with the technology that we have at hand and the constraints that we've kind of outlined. The site constraints don't allow for some of the, for a geothermal, the size of the building, and without really covering the entire site area with PV, we're limited to how much renewables we can get. And the inherent nature of the building, a police department that's 24/7, 365, uses energy at a much higher rate than a federal office building that's, again, 8 to 5 or 8 to 6. So everything we're doing here, from mechanical systems to the building envelope, are geared towards reducing energy usage and minimizing CO2 emissions to the greatest extent possible. We're considering other strategies with building materials, lumber, sustainable wood products that also help to lower embodied carbons, are other sustainable attributes that we're going to try to bring not only to the interior of the building, but if feasible to the exterior of the building to help showcase some of the strategies that are happening. So as Mike kind of mentioned, while maybe not on day one you want to invest in carports that may have PVs on the roof, having the infrastructure in place that could be added over time. Or if you really wanted to do all permeable up front, or 80% permeable, whatever that right balance number is, and do a lower number of PVs on day one, we want to make sure that the infrastructure is in place to have PVs to the greatest extent possible. So, just shooting straight, I don't know that the building would ever be able to achieve 100% net zero, because that also, in the industry, requires other offsets, being involved with green energy programs, carbon sinks, other things that don't necessarily happen on your site, but as a commitment by the village to contribute back to other industries. So what we're trying to do is get you as far down the road as we can to make sure that the infrastructure is in place, because we're seeing technology, expand at a, infinite rate. And so the technologies that are here today are only going to improve, 10 years from now, as you're halfway towards the 2045 plan, and your building will be 20 years old at the time that the 2045 plan is really taking root in society.
Okay. I've said, and I continue to think, that we have two obligations. One is to do the best we can with our building, and that involves trying to reduce the cost of operations, but we define cost not only as dollars. And I also think we have an obligation to try and model or demonstrate, be an example for what we expect in the balance of the community. Mm-hmm. So I understand the geothermal challenges. Not a big fan of drilling holes in the parking lot later. Mm-hmm. But everything else on that list, I think we ought to try and find a way to weave into the project. Those are things that, whether we achieve exactly the description that any one of us has in our head of those 5 or 6 additional things, and whether it costs the exact amount of money, those are the things we should be trying to model and put into the examples that we're setting, I think. And so I'd like to see us pursue the balance of that list other than that geothermal system. So that's my 2 cents. Anybody from the audience want to come and comment on some of the conversation they've listened to about environmental attributes?
There's some local...
Jim.
There's some local environmental companies that are at the upscale. There's one in Hinsdale that basically they pulled away from Exxon, and they've got, wow, they're doing some awesome stuff. And a lot of these companies, the technology is like within what they were talking about 2-3 years ago. They passed that already. And if we could we can showcase and pull in some of this, you know, brain geniuses with energy. It's really not that hard. I mean, just make sure we search out the best, because they're out there. Some of these, I met one of this guy in Hinsdale. He works for this energy company, and anything when it comes to energy, it's like some people playing golf. They know everything, and it's amazing. And like, you know, let's think about something. You know, I'm not looking for futuristics, but let's think about something that we plan something where we're not basically backstepping into something because we passed something else up. Just ask some of these, reach out and ask these people, because they're out there. It's amazing. Environmentalists are out there. It's just not taking a flag environmentalists. They're coming up with some solutions, and it's every day comes up with. It's great. But the green, much more green. They made it work. They made it work in the city. A lot of buildings, green roofs, solar panels. Bridgeview Court has in a parking lot energy panels in the parking lot that are attached to help with the energy and the lighting of the parking lot. Anything that we could critique at a lower cost, go for it.
Thanks, Jim.
Several questions. I don't know if the first question is captured under the hybrid geothermal system, but I'm aware that, at least in a residential building, people sometimes pay attention to the idea of a heat sink. And I don't know if that's done in buildings of this size, and I don't know if the hybrid geothermal system encompasses that concept. Could someone speak to that first of all?
And that's, yes, in general, that's what the geothermal wells are. You know, they drill holes. Brian, how deep? 600, 200. Yeah. And that's, you know, the deeper you go, because once you get down below, you know, the Earth's temperature stays at like 50 degrees, and so that's 50-degree water that you use for both heating and cooling throughout the building. So you're right, on a residential scale they can do it, and certainly on a building of this size it's feasible. The site constraints here are the biggest challenges we have to make it a fully you know, beneficial system.
And is geothermal the typical preferred approach for a heat sink, or are there others that can be explored?
Well, on a site like this, it's really the only option. The other way that we've seen it done is, and sometimes in other office parks where they might have a detention pond, you can actually use the surface area of the water, and you don't have to go as deep, and you can just kind of run that piping through the bottom of the pond. But again, it takes real estate that we don't quite have here. That's again, site constraints and the size of the building are really our two biggest challenges.
So the idea is that the water is the sink as opposed to something else?
Correct.
The second question concerns the lifespan of the photovoltaic panels. Can someone speak to that?
Yeah, I think Commissioner Calvini asked for that. I suspect we'll get that in the future.
A third question concerns the possibility of separating out, if that should become a necessity, as opposed to something that I hear people here saying, we'd like to do it all, but if for some reason it couldn't happen in one fell swoop, how separable are these things?
Okay. None of them are what we're trying to do is, as we mentioned, we're very, very early in design and trying to give additional direction about the intentions and aspirations of the council, and I think that's what we've done there. None of them are necessarily linked or necessarily separable at this point.
Okay. Can we flash back through the different, just as a reminder to me of
the different, which?
What was the slide before this one? Was that relevant?
So this is the breakdown of what's recommended within the $2.6 million of enhancements.
Go to the one after this. Okay, and then the next one. Okay, and I think someone's already asked about the net zero upon initial occupancy versus later. Okay.
Any other comments from council? Questions from council? Okay. We'll continue. Thank you guys for joining us tonight.
Thank you. And Mayor, if I could wrap up, I think we heard direction from council to pursue consideration of some of these additional enhancements. I would like to make the council aware, if I go back to the slide that I had up earlier that showed the, so here's the total project budget breakdown. This was prepared by Leopardo back in September of 2021, so a very preliminary budgetary breakdown, but it has the $2.6 million of enhancements. To the extent that we exceed that $2.6 million, it may require us to go back and relook at the financial plan that supports the way that we cover the costs of this project. So we understand what the council is asking us to do, and we will go through that exercise. I'll also let council know that as we wrap up the schematic design phase of the project, that schematic design package will be taken by Leopardo, and they'll be updating cost estimates. That will occur during the month of February. So we'll have also updated cost estimate information to go about making these decisions.
Great. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you very much.
Does that wrap up manager's report, Mike?
I believe so. Yes, nothing further under manager's report, Mayor.
Attorney's report.
Thank you, Mayor. Only 2 items tonight. The first is an ordinance amending certain traffic control provisions at Prairie and Forest, and the other is an ordinance calling for a public hearing and a joint review board meeting to consider the designation of the Washington and Curtis Street tax increment redevelopment area. Both will be on next week's active agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Enzo. Item 12, council member reports. Portion of the meeting for council members to report out on goings on in the community, other entities, organizations they're part of, working with. Danny, what do you got?
No report. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Chris?
No report tonight, thank you.
Rich?
No report, Mayor. Thank you.
No report, Mayor. Thank you.
Nicole?
No report, Mayor. Thank you.
No reports.
Right?
Wow. All right. All right. Well, then I will call for a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you all and good night.